Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're navigating a field that's, well, it's really changing how we understand global events. Everything from human rights investigations to international law. We're talking about open source investigations, or OSINT. And look, for anyone new to this world, it can feel like a vast, sometimes pretty chaotic ocean of information.
It absolutely can.
Yeah.
And that's precisely why we're tackling, a really foundational document today. The Berkeley Protocol on Digital Open Source Investigations. It was co-published by the UN and UC Berkeley.
Okay.
And this isn't just some dry legal text. It's actually a practical, pretty vital guide. Brings much needed clarity, standards to this area that's just evolving so fast.
So our mission today is to really unpack this protocol for you, whether you're just, dipping your toes into OSINT, or maybe you're looking for a structured, reliable way to make sense of all the information online.
Yeah.
We'll pull out the most important bits, maybe highlight some surprising facts, and just show you how to navigate this world with hopefully more confidence and critical thinking. Okay.
Sounds good.
Let's dive in. So first things first. What exactly is open source information? It sounds a bit like, well, just information, right? But I gather the protocol is pretty specific.
It's much more precise than that, yeah. According to the protocol, open source information is, and I'm quoting loosely here, publicly available information that any member of the public can observe, purchase, or request without requiring special legal status or unauthorized access.
Right.
So think of it as digital data you can legally and openly get your hands on. No backdoors, no special logins needed, generally.
Right. And where does this digital gold mine actually come from? What kind of stuff are we talking about?
Oh, a huge array of places. You've got user-generated content, social media posts, things like that, documents, images, videos, audio recordings on websites, info sharing platforms, even publicly accessible satellite imagery, and government published data too. It's this sprawling, kind of ever-growing digital landscape.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting and frankly kind of revolutionary for investigations. The protocol highlights how OSINT has fundamentally changed things.
Yeah.
Like imagine trying to investigate something happening thousands of miles away, maybe in a conflict zone where you just can't get physical access or it's delayed.
Right. That used to be a major roadblock.
Exactly. But OSINT lets investigators sort of bypass those traditional information gatekeepers. It gives almost real-time access to potential wrongdoing that might otherwise stay hidden.
And what's fascinating, despite how powerful it is, open source information, well, it's often been used in a very ad hoc way.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Wild West,
Right. Just grab what you can find.
Exactly. So this protocol was specifically developed to address that. It provides international standards, some much needed guidance for investigators across different fields, human rights, criminal justice, you name it. The ultimate takeaway. It really aims to professionalize the practice, make sure it's accurate, reliable, especially if this info might end up as like crucial evidence in court.
That makes sense. So the protocol goes deep into definitions, and you mentioned for someone new, some distinctions are really crucial. Let's start with open source versus closed source. They sound like opposites, but what's the core difference in an investigation?
Yeah, the core distinction is really access. Open source, like we said, publicly available to anyone. Closed source has restricted access. Simple enough, right?
Seems so.
But here's a key nuance. Information from hacks, maybe leaks, security vulnerabilities. Even if it appears publicly online, there might still be legal and ethical restrictions on actually using it.
Okay, so just because you can see it doesn't mean you can use it freely.
Precisely. And this might surprise you. Information from the dark web. It can actually be considered open source if you access it without unauthorized entry.
Really? How did that work?
Well, say you use a Tor browser. Using the browser itself is legal. If you then find information that's just openly available within that space, without hacking or anything, that technically fits the definition. The key rule, sort of the bottom line, is open source generally does not involve interacting with or asking for info directly from individual users.
Okay, so if I DM someone on Twitter asking for details, even if their profile is public, that interaction makes it closed source.
Generally, yes. Because that's a direct private interaction, not just observing what's already publicly out there.
Got it. That's a really useful distinction. So if I'm a new investigator, how do I actually get this open source stuff according to the protocol? What are the permitted ways?
Right. The protocol lays out three main ways. First is observation, just, browsing a public website or platform. Even if it needs a basic login, as long as it's open to all users legally and you're not breaking any privacy controls.
Okay, browsing.
Second, Purchase. This means getting data from platforms that aggregate public info, but only if those services are available to any member of the public, not just, say, law enforcement-only databases.
All right. Needs to be generally available.
And third is request. Now, this specifically means requesting public information from state agencies, like under Freedom of Information laws. It does not mean asking private individuals for stuff.
Clear. Okay, what about these terms? Open source intelligence, open source investigation, and open source evidence. They sound really similar, almost interchangeable. Why does the protocol separate them?
Yeah, they sound close, but the distinction is really important. Open source intelligence, or OSINT with capital letters, is actually a subcategory. It's typically used for policy, decision-making, like informing security assessments or, tracking persons of interest.
Okay, it's more strategic.
Exactly. Open source investigation is the actual process of using open source info for finding information and gathering potential evidence.
The activity itself.
Right. And then open source evidence is that very specific subset of information that actually has evidentiary value. Stuff that could be admitted in legal proceedings.
So not everything you find is evidence.
Definitely not. And the key insight here is understanding that helps you critically judge what you're seeing online. What's its actual legal weight or maybe lack thereof. Misusing the term evidence is a common pitfall.
That's super helpful. Another subtle one, open source software versus open source information. They sound almost identical.
They do. Easy to mix up, but they're quite distinct. Open source software is code that's freely available to use, change, republish. Think like Linux or certain browsers.
Okay, the tools.
Exactly, the tools. It's distinct from open source information, which is the data itself. So investigators often use open source software to find and collect open source information. One's the tool, the other's the target data.
Got it. Tool versus data. And finally, this critical trio for assessing any info online: credibility, reliability, and veracity. What do they each mean here?
Yeah, these are like the pillars of evaluation. Credibility is about believability, trustworthiness. Can you trust the source? Is it known for being accurate? Reliability is about consistency, dependability. Is this information showing up consistently across different sources? Or is it just a one-off weird claim? Does the source perform dependably over time?
Okay.
And veracity, or you might hear validity, means accuracy or truthfulness. Is the information actually correct? Does it represent what it claims to represent?
Right.
These distinctions are critical because they let you break down your evaluation. You're not just saying true or false.
Yeah.
You're assessing different aspects of the information's quality.
That makes a lot of sense. It's a much more nuanced way to look at things.
Definitely. And the protocol emphasizes that while the tech, the sources, they change incredibly fast, these fundamental principles endure. These aren't just like nice ideas. They're the bedrock of doing OSINT responsibly. They ensure quality and, importantly, minimize harm.
Okay, so let's dive into those principles. First up, the professional principles. What guides the investigator's conduct? What's top of that list?
First, accountability. This means clear documentation, meticulous record keeping. You have to recognize that your methods, your findings, they might be questioned, maybe even in court.
So, CYA, basically. Cover your...
Well, yeah, in a professional sense.
Yeah.
The ultimate takeaway is, assume every step you take in OSINT could end up under a microscope. Document everything, because that digital trail is your defense.
Right.
Then there's competency, having the right training, the right skills, accurately reporting data, and crucially, acknowledging any gaps. Gaps in your knowledge or gaps in the online content you could find. It's about being prepared, but also transparent about what you know, and just as importantly, what you don't know.
And a huge one, especially online, objectivity. How do you even try to achieve that in the, the vast, often biased landscape of the internet?
Yeah, that's the challenge, isn't it? And here's something that might surprise people. Your own browser, your search engine, even your physical location, your past search history.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They can all influence the search results you get. It creates inherent biases you might not even be aware of.
Wow. Like a filter bubble for investigators.
Kind of, yeah. So to counteract this, investigators need to actively use different methods, like use multiple search queries, try different search engines, maybe even different browsers or VPNs to change location, just to ensure they get diverse results.
Okay.
And it's not just the tools. Investigators also need to be aware that online information might be, well, unevenly available from certain groups or parts of society. That can skew findings too if you're not careful.
So it's not just what you search, but how you search, the tools you use, and constantly checking yourself and the digital environment for those biases. What about legality and security awareness?
It's super important. Legality means knowing the laws that apply, especially data protection and privacy laws like GDPR or others, depending on where you are and what data you're looking at.
Yeah.
Even publicly available information has privacy implications. Investigators must be aware of the mosaic effect.
The mosaic effect.
Yeah, it's where you combine seemingly harmless, separate pieces of public data, but together they can actually lead to re-identifying an individual, which could violate privacy laws.
Oh, okay. Putting the pieces together creates a privacy risk.
Exactly. And security awareness, that's everyone's job. It's about minimizing your own digital footprint while investigating, understanding confidentiality, data integrity, availability, being ready for threats like phishing attacks, malware. Your online actions have real-world consequences for you and others. Protecting yourself, your data, your sources, it's paramount.
Okay, moving to the methodological principles. These sound more like the nuts and bolts, the how-to of the investigation itself. What's crucial here?
Accuracy is number one. Relying only on credible material, avoiding exaggeration, using objective language. And accuracy is often boosted by testing multiple hypotheses, getting peer review if possible.
Right, checking your work.
Then, data minimization. This is key. Only collect data that's genuinely justified, necessary, and proportional to your investigation's goal.
Why is that so important? Seems like more data is better.
Not always. Over-collecting creates security risks, more data to protect, more potential breaches, it raises privacy concerns, and it can just create storage headaches. The protocol often favors collecting specific items manually over just hoovering up everything automatically.
Okay, less is more, sometimes.
Sometimes. Then preservation. This is about preventing under-collection because online info is so fragile it can vanish in an instant deleted, removed by platforms.
Right, that digital sandcastle idea.
Exactly. Preservation ensures you have that information later. And finally, security by design. This means your whole setup, your hardware, software, networks needs to be secure and anonymized by default before you even start. And you need to keep monitoring and adjusting it. Things like penetration testing to find vulnerabilities.
Wow, that's thorough. Okay, and the last set, ethical principles. These seem to really bring in the human element, especially given how sensitive some OSINT worker can be.
They absolutely do. First is dignity. Being sensitive to human rights, protecting witnesses and victims, being mindful of what you share publicly, for instance, maybe not showing the full graphic extent of violence if it's not strictly necessary for the investigation's purpose.
Right, the do no harm principle applied digitally.
Precisely. Then humility, recognizing your own limitations, being willing to correct errors, ideally having a process for reporting and correcting mistakes.
That's important.
And inclusivity, making sure a range of perspectives and experiences are incorporated. This is vital because, as we mentioned, access to tech and online representation isn't equal. Different demographics might be underrepresented online, leading to skewed results.
So if you're not careful, your OSINT could unintentionally overlook certain groups or types of violations just because they're less visible online.
Exactly right.
Right.
For instance, the protocol notes that information on sexual and gender-based violence, or about women, girls, LGBTQI+ persons, might be less represented. Investigators need to be aware of these gaps. Look for coded language may be used online.
Got it. You need that digital landscape assessment.
Yes. And then there's independence, avoiding conflicts of interest that could taint your findings. And transparency, avoiding misrepresentation. Now, using virtual identities or sock puppets is often important for security and anonymity,
Right.
but using them to actively deceive someone to get information or to gain unauthorized access, that crosses ethical lines and could even be illegal. It's a really crucial balance between protecting yourself and maintaining integrity.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, the protocol also lays out a clear investigation process. Describes it as a cycle, right? Not always linear, but phases that provide a roadmap. What are they?
Yeah, it's a cycle. There are 6 main phases described: online inquiries, preliminary assessment, collection, preservation, verification, and investigative analysis.
Okay.
And it's iterative, like you said. New info might send you back to an earlier stage. It's a continuous loop, not really a straight line from A to Z.
Let's quickly touch on each one for listeners maybe new to this. Online inquiries, what's the difference between searching and monitoring here?
Good question. Searching is more task-oriented discovery. You're using keywords, maybe Boolean operators, to actively find new information on a specific topic.
Okay.
Monitoring is more about consistently reviewing sources you've already identified, like specific websites, social media accounts, watching them over time to see how content changes or what new stuff appears.
Got it. Active seeking versus passive watching.
Kind of, yeah. And both require you to be vigilant about bias, your own cognitive biases, and the biases inherent in the online data itself. Remember how some groups or violations might be underrepresented?
Right.
Or how people might use coded language, especially for things like hate speech, to try and avoid detection? Investigators need to actively diversify searches to counter this.
Okay. Next phase. Preliminary assessment. Sounds like a filter step.
It absolutely is. Before you go all in on collecting something, you pause and assess. Is this info actually relevant? Does it seem reliable, at least prima facie, on first look? Is it likely to disappear soon from the internet? Is it safe to collect? It helps stop you from collecting way too much stuff, which saves time and resources, and it helps ensure you're complying with privacy rules.
Smart. Then collection. Actually grabbing the information. What's the standard here? How do you do it properly?
You capture the online info, ideally in its native format if possible. Screenshots, PDFs, maybe forensic downloads for more complex data. But crucially, you collect specific details along with the content.
Like what?
Things like the URL, the HTML source code, a full-page capture, not just what's visible, any embedded media, the metadata like geotags and photos, upload dates,
Okay.
that contextual data like comments around a post, your collection data, your IP address or your anonymized one, the virtual identity you used, the exact timestamp, and a hash value.
Ah, the hash value, you mentioned that, the digital fingerprint.
Exactly. You generate this unique code for the data you collected. If even one tiny bit of that data changes later, the hash value will be different. It's key for proving the authenticity down the road, showing it hasn't been tampered with since you collected it.
Makes sense. Okay, after collection comes preservation. Why is this so vital? You touched on the fragility of online data.
Precisely. That digital sandcastle analogy again. Online information is often incredibly precarious. Social media platforms take down content, users delete posts, websites go offline, data gets corrupted.
Gone.
Preservation ensures that the information remains accessible, authentic, and usable later on, especially for accountability purposes, like court cases.
So how do you preserve it?
It involves maintaining its identity, knowing what it is, its persistence, its technical integrity isn't degraded, and its renderability. You can actually view it. It also means managing the chain of custody.
Chain of custody, like in physical evidence.
Exactly the same principle.
Yeah.
You need to track who handled the data, when, and why. Typically, you keep an untouched evidentiary copy locked away, basically. And then you make separate working copies for your actual analysis so you don't risk altering the original.
Right. Protect the master copy. Okay, then verification. This sounds like the real detective work, sorting fact from fiction.
It really is. This is where you rigorously assess the accuracy and validity of the information you've collected and preserved. It involves several things.
Such as?
Source analysis. Looking at the source itself, its provenance, where did it come from? Its credibility, its independence, even something called attenuation. How many steps removed is this information from the original event? Was it an eyewitness or someone reporting what someone else said?
Okay, tracing it back.
Then technical analysis.
Yeah.
Inspecting the digital guts. Looking at embedded metadata, again, like EASE-IF data in images which can contain camera settings, sometimes location. Checking source code for signs of alteration. And content analysis. Examining the actual content. Visual clues in photos or videos. Using geolocation, comparing landmarks in a photo to satellite imagery to pinpoint the exact location. Chronolocation, using shadows, sun position, weather to estimate the time of day or date. Checking for internal consistency within the piece of information and external consistency with other known facts.
Wow, that's detailed, like CSI for digital stuff.
Pretty much. For instance, in content analysis, you might spot a unique building in a photo. You then use satellite maps, maybe Street View, to find that building, confirming where that photo was taken, and possibly cross-referencing shadows or events to narrow down when.
Fascinating. Okay, finally, investigative analysis. Making sense of it all, connecting the dots.
Exactly. This is where you process all that verified information, maybe translating languages, aggregating data from different sources, reformatting it so you can work with it, and then you conduct various types of analysis.
What kind of analysis?
Could be image or video comparison, looking for links, spatial analysis, using geographic data to map out patterns, actor mapping, identifying the key people or groups involved and their relationships, social network analysis, mapping connections between individuals online, incident mapping, plotting events over time and geography, or crime violation pattern analysis.
So taking all those verified pieces and building the bigger picture.
That's the goal. Interpret the data, draw conclusions based on the data, identify any remaining gaps where you might need more information, and often present these findings clearly, maybe using charts, summaries, timelines, maps, whatever helps connect the dots.
Right. Okay, so the deep dive doesn't quite end there. The protocol also covers reporting on findings, sharing what you've learned, whether that's written, oral, visual, what's crucial for those reports.
Again, accuracy is paramount. Clear attribution, where did this information come from? Completeness, have you included relevant context? Confidentiality, protecting sensitive sources or victim details, using neutral, objective language. And transparency about your methodology. How did you find and verify this?
Okay.
The goal is really to illuminate the facts effectively for whoever your audience is, whether that's a courtroom, policymakers, or the public. Present the data clearly, state your methods, acknowledge any limitations.
This whole process, it sounds incredibly rigorous, very structured, but also, I imagine, potentially very difficult, emotionally taxing, especially if dealing with, say, graphic human rights violations online.
Absolutely.
The protocol includes a section on resilience plan and self-care. Why is that so important, specifically for OSINT investigators? They're often remote, not physically at a crime scene.
It's a critical element and, yeah, often overlooked. Even working remotely, OSINT investigators are frequently exposed to large amounts, significant quantities of graphic, traumatic, digital information, videos, images, firsthand accounts.
Right.
This can absolutely lead to secondary trauma, vicarious trauma. It's incredibly real, even if you're thousands of miles away. So the protocol emphasizes that organizations need to build an environment that genuinely values self-care, with sensitivity to gender, cultural differences.
What kind of strategies does it suggest?
Things like individual awareness, learning to recognize behavioral changes in yourself that might signal stress or trauma, practical tactics for minimizing exposure when possible, maybe turning off audio on graphic videos, using smaller screens, taking regular breaks away from the screen,
Okay.
and fostering community of support. Things like debriefings after difficult cases, team activities, peer support. Your well-being isn't just an ethical issue. It's critical for maintaining security. A stressed investigator might make mistakes, and for the quality of the work itself. A burnt-out investigator isn't effective.
That's a really vital point. Wow. I have to say, I'm genuinely struck by how much rigor, ethical consideration, and even self-awareness goes into what many people might just dismiss as, Googling something. This deep dive into the Berkeley Protocol has really reframed my understanding of what open source investigations truly entails.
It really does have that effect. And this protocol, it offers such a robust framework for anyone, really individual researchers, small NGOs, large international organizations. It helps ensure their work is professional, it's reliable, and it can genuinely contribute to justice and accountability.
Yeah.
And it highlights something else too. The ability to critically assess online information isn't just for specialists anymore. It's becoming a vital skill for anyone trying to navigate our, incredibly information-rich landscape.
That's a great point, and maybe that raises an important question for you listening. How will this understanding of these rigorous OSINT principles, this framework, how might it change the way you approach information you encounter in your own life? And what steps might you take to become a more discerning consumer or maybe even contributor of online knowledge?
A perfect thought to ponder, really. Because this framework, it empowers you to ask better, much more critical questions about the stuff you see online every single day.
Absolutely. Well, that's all for this deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
We really hope this exploration of the Berkeley Protocol has given you some valuable insights, maybe a kind of compass for navigating the fascinating, complex, and incredibly important world of open source investigations.